What's up, guys? It's three-time NFL Pro Bowler, all-decade return specialist, Josh Cribbs. I want to welcome you to the Match Sports Connection podcast, where Alex hosts the Mid-American Conference Best.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Max Sports Connection podcast. I'm your host, Alex the Captain. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Big news out of the Mid-American Conference and out of the Northeast section of the country. UMass was officially voted to receive an invitation by all 12 institutions in the Mid-American Conference. There's a press conference scheduled later this week. In fact, it may happen by the time you guys get this episode, and it is expected that UMass will accept that invitation to join the Mid-American Conference. A lot of things have been coming up. A lot of questions have been raised. I just kind of want to go over my initial thoughts, my opinions, things that I kind of expect to see happen, things that I want to try to answer for you guys, and what is coming next for the Mid-American Conference. A lot of people are talking about how this is not a good fit for UMass, mostly UMass fans that I've seen talk about this, and I kind of want to dispel a few things, kind of help put your mind at ease a little bit. The biggest question mark, the biggest concern seems to be basketball. The A10, where they will be coming from, is a very respected league. They are one of the top 10 leagues in the country right now. In fact, in their net rating, or their Ken Pom ratings, I believe, they sit at number 8 and number 8 in men and women's basketball, whereas the MAC sits at 24 in men and 19 in women. This is a fair argument, right? You know, this is a school, UMass is, that has a proud basketball history, a Final Four appearance back in the 90s, another tournament appearance back in the 2014 tournament. This is a program that has a lot of great basketball history. As a lot of people have also pointed out, they have not had a lot of great football history recently, but in the same decade that they went to the Final Four, they won an FCS national championship, back then Division I AA. To me, that is just as important, if not more important, in terms of school history as a Final Four run. I think a Final Four run is inherently harder to get to when the field is much bigger, so I want to recognize that. However, a national championship is a national championship, and I think a lot of people are forgetting that. UMass, at the FCS level, Division I AA, whatever you want to call it, they were a very successful football program, winning that championship back in the 90s, and then when they transitioned to the MAC, a lot of people talk about they were terrible. They only won 5 games total in their entire time in that first 3 years in the Mid-American Conference. One, they came in as a football-only member. They were also in the middle of transitioning from FCS to FBS. This is a program who, when you look at it, you got to actually look at everything. You can't just look at wins and losses. This is a program who is transitioning. They didn't have the same amount of scholarships. They didn't have all the same resources for football that the rest of the Mid-American Conference did. Most of their resources were devoted to basketball and competing in the A10. So I think it's really important to kind of highlight those things as we dive into this. Now, I don't know what sports are coming as a full member institution. And based off of my breakdown, that would include baseball, men and women's basketball, men and women's cross country, field hockey, football, men and women's indoor and outdoor track and field, women's lacrosse, women's soccer, softball, men and women's swimming and diving, and women's tennis. I would imagine that also means men's tennis, but I did not see anything on the UMass website that suggested that they had a men's tennis program. So if UMass does have a men's tennis program, I expect that that's coming as well. If they do not, well then, they will not be competing in the Mid-American Conference. But I wanted to point something out. Everybody's talking very, very much about leaving the prestige of the A10 to go and play lower tier Division I basketball in the Mid-American Conference. The MAC has been down in recent years. I am not going to deny that. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it. I'm not going to pretend like this is all a myth. The MAC has taken a hard nosedive lately. And just a couple years ago, we're in position when Nate Oates was at Buffalo that the MAC could have received multiple bids to the NCAA tournament. Did not happen, and the MAC has taken a nosedive since. Part of that might be the Nate Oates leaving, taking the Alabama job. Part of that might be just the downward trajectory the conference faced. Part of that could have been the pandemic and just kind of changing and reshaping everything. All of that to say, while basketball is very important to UMass, I want to look at some of these other sports. Based off of the information I've researched, based off of what I've looked up, I think it's important to recognize what UMass has with basketball and what they're losing, but I think it's also important to look at what they're gaining. When you look at baseball, the current RPI of the conferences, the Mid-American Conference sits at number 20, the Atlantic 10, that UMass is leaving, sits at 24. Well, let's look at softball. Surely softball's different. The MAC currently sits at 17. The A10 sits at 26. Now, I'll give you women's field hockey. Looking at the team rankings, I couldn't find anything on conference rankings, but looking at team rankings, the A10 had 5 teams, I believe, in the top 50, maybe 6 in the top 50. The Mid-American Conference only had 3. So, now, Miami has been a very dominant field hockey program, winning the last 13 MAC championships. It'll be really interesting to see where UMass comes in on that. So I do think you lose a little bit on the field hockey side, but I think what the A10 loses, the MAC gains. And that's the other part of it. These numbers will change depending on how successful UMass is and how successful they currently are. You know, if you're talking about a baseball team who's not stellar, I mean, it's not going to really help the MAC RPI, but it's going to help the A10 RPI when you leave. I do also want to kind of address the media markets. I think a lot of people from the MAC side are asking, well, what does UMass bring? What is the value to bringing UMass to the Mid-American Conference? And I think for me, looking at it, you have to look at the media side of it. UMass is an entire Northeast market. That means television markets in Boston, in Connecticut, in really all over the Northeast, up to Maine, Vermont, Delaware. You are now getting a MAC footprint for more eyeballs on the conference. More eyeballs means more recruiting. More recruiting means more players coming to your programs, which gives you an opportunity to be more competitive as a whole. It helps UMass too. They get a bigger footprint in the rest of the country, specifically in the Midwest, Ohio and Michigan dominating the Mid-American Conference with 9 schools. But now you get even more access to Chicago, Northern Illinois territory, Northwestern territory. Now you get more access to Indianapolis, Ball State territory, Purdue, Indiana, Notre Dame. You start to take a turn into Ohio. You've got Toledo, Dayton, Akron, Cleveland, probably not Columbus too much. We all know what Ohio State does down there, but Cincinnati, another great area. So this is a move that is beneficial for both sides. This is a move that makes sense for recruiting purposes. I think both sides are going to benefit. I do think the MAC underspends a little bit in terms of their coaches, and especially in Olympic sports such as basketball, whereas that's where I think UMass is going to excel. But it's clear to me UMass is going to come in as one of the lowest teams in the country as a football program. They're going to be one of the lower teams in the Mid-American Conference in terms of football. That's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. There's been more discussion as well about potential expansion partners. I very cheekily threw together a graphic suggesting that UConn should go ahead and just come on over with UMass. A lot of people gave me a lot of flack for that, and I recognize that, and I want to address that too. One, UConn is my dream. I would love to have UConn in the Mid-American Conference. I recognize there's about a 99.99% chance that's not happening. I repeat, UConn is not coming to the Mid-American Conference. And here's a couple reasons why. One, you bring UConn in as a football-only member. That's great. I think UConn would compete well within the Mid-American Conference, and they'd be a good fit. It would give UMass a great regional traveling partner. That's, again, a slightly bigger media market that the MAC would have access to. But then now you have the issue of finding a school that doesn't sponsor football who you feel is competitive in basketball. Who do you bring in? Cleveland State out of the Horizon League? They're not leaving the Horizon League. Do you look at Wright State? Probably not. Dayton's not joining. Dayton has football. You're going to tell Dayton, hey, don't bring your football, but bring your basketball and everything. That's not happening. You look over to University of Illinois, Chicago. They don't have football, but it just doesn't make sense. So I think right now the MAC would be very hard-pressed to ask a school to come in, only bring your football because of what you have going on with your other sports. That doesn't make sense, especially with a brand like UConn. UConn's brand in basketball, as well as the talent in basketball, is exceptional. They would run the MAC year in and year out in basketball, and probably without even trying. In football, not so much. But the brand would be such a huge, huge boost to the Mid-American Conference. I just don't see that happening. UConn is not leaving the Big East to join the Mid-American Conference in basketball. So let's look at other potential partners. Back in 2021, the MAC looked at Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky. I think at this point, if you believe the rumblings online, Western Kentucky has to be the next target for the Mid-American Conference. Same thing I said for UMass. You get into a different market. You would now get into the Louisville market, the Kentucky market, start to break into the South just a little bit if you're the MAC. You get a good basketball program, a program who's had a lot of great success over the years, and that would be massive for the MAC. But the big thing here, from everything I read, everything I gathered, the WKU Middle Tennessee State University deal the last time fell through, partially because of the media deal, partially because one wouldn't come without the other. That is what I have been led to believe, and that is what I have accepted as truth. If you have other information, please tell me. I want to get this right. Western Kentucky doesn't need to bring Middle Tennessee this time. They don't need a travel partner. Sure, it would be great to have a regional partner. You have Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky both join the conference. That'd be huge. But you don't need to do that now. In fact, because of UMass joining, this gives Western Kentucky, who I believe signed a grant of rights, the ability to try to join the MAC if they can get out of that grant of rights. You don't need Middle Tennessee right now. This opens that door. If there is truly still mutual interest, this opens that door. Everybody says, oh, well, Western Kentucky is in a fine place with where they're at. Everything that they play sports-wise is rated higher than the MAC. That may be so, but is the program rated higher than the MAC? I think everybody wants to make a big deal about the conferences, and that's a fair point. But how's your program doing against that better conference? Are you sitting towards the bottom? Are you constantly at the top? I know Western Kentucky's played in a couple conference championships lately. They've got pretty good basketball, as I mentioned. But what about your other sports? What about the non-revenue sports? Those are still athletes too. And I think that's important to talk about as well. So let's look at the rest of this list here of potential expansion partners, at least from my purview. Middle Tennessee, Western Kentucky, obviously would love to have both. Definitely would love to have Western Kentucky to bring the MAC back to an even 14 teams. Don't know if that happens, but that's what I would really like. Somebody suggested on Twitter, Marshall Part 3. I see this as equally as unlikely as the UConn scenario. And here's why. The first time Marshall was in the Mid-American Conference was back in the 60s. And we kicked them out for recruiting violations. Okay, they dropped down to Division I AA when they did the divisional split back in the late 70s. I want to say it was 78. They played that schedule all the way up through the 90s, won a few national championships in the 90s, made the jump to FBS, joined the MAC again, dominated the MAC, and I mean dominated the MAC, and then left the MAC after a few years. Perception is everything. Western Kentucky and Marshall and Middle Tennessee all have the same thing, at least their fans do. We're not going to the MAC because we are better than where we were with the MAC or where we would be if we joined the MAC. I don't see Marshall as a likely option, not because I don't think they would fit well, because they fit very well. Geographical footprint, you get the MAC back into West Virginia. It just doesn't make sense for Marshall to make a lateral move to a conference they've been in twice. And they weren't just football-only members. They were all sports members. So it doesn't make sense to me for Marshall to join the conference for a third time. I would love it. I think it'd be great. I don't see it happening. People have suggested going to the FCS, looking at Southern Illinois, North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Missouri State, Southern Indiana, Southern Illinois, even maybe Indiana State. I even heard somebody talk about bringing in Youngstown State. Here's why I don't think some of these will work. I'm actually on board with a couple of these ideas. I love the idea of bringing in Southern Illinois, the North and South Dakota states, who have rich football histories, and they play in some pretty decent basketball leagues. I don't like the idea of Youngstown State because we don't need a 7th MAC team in the state of Ohio. You've got really the 3 big corners of the state kind of painted. You've got Northwest Ohio covered with Bowling Green, Toledo. You've got Northeast Ohio covered with Akron, Kent State. You also have basically all of Southern Ohio, so Cincinnati, and then over to Southeastern Ohio with Athens. So you've got really all of your bases covered in the state of Ohio. You're not getting into Columbus. That's Ohio State. You don't touch Ohio State. Youngstown State doesn't make sense. I think athletically, they make plenty of sense. Footprint-wise, the MAC is looking to expand outward. They don't want to continue to add within the state. That is a lot of headache. That is a lot of hassle. Youngstown State is an affiliate in some sports. Believe it's field hockey, lacrosse. Yeah, so in those sports, they are affiliates. But it does not make sense to add their basketball, their football, and take away even more the fan bases, especially in Northeast Ohio with Kent State and Akron. Fan bases who are already struggling right now. Makes zero sense to me. The MAC will not add a 7th team from the state of Ohio to be a full member. It's not going to happen. You're going to add a 2nd or 3rd team from the state of Indiana or a 2nd or 3rd team from the state of Illinois. You're not even going to add a 4th team from the state of Michigan. Ohio and Michigan are off limits for MAC expansion. It's not happening. Southern Illinois makes sense. Athletically, fits well with the conference. I think they would do a great job in the Mid-American Conference. North Dakota State, South Dakota State, logistics would be really hard. It'd be very difficult to get them to commute, especially now that we've added UMass. That would be a long commute for a conference that's primarily a bus league. You know, they would have to take flights, which would be more expensive, would be more of a hassle all around. This is primarily a bus league. Adding UMass changes that a little bit. Buffalo might still take it as a bus, but the rest of the conference likely taking a flight. Missouri State, they're an affiliate in wrestling. I love the idea of adding Missouri State. You know, decent football, or could be competitive in the MAC. Solid Olympic sports. Them, Southern Indiana. Indiana State is one that I really like the idea of. you get Ball State to reunite with an old rival. They played them this last year, actually, for the first time in, I want to say it was 9 years. Ball State gets to reunite with an old rival in Indiana State for the Blue Key rivalry. Or I think it's the Blue Key Victory Bell is the official name of that rivalry. That one seems to make a lot of sense to me. But I just don't know. I have no idea. Nobody expected UMass to be added. I certainly didn't. I don't think any of you did listening. Now, we do have a couple questions some of you guys have chimed in on via Twitter. A couple DMs, couple on the timeline. A lot of questions, very similar. I'm just going to run through the top 4 or 5 that I noticed and just kind of give you an answer because, well, I think we're all asking questions about this merger, about this, partnership, about what's next. And that's fair. We're all going to have questions. First one, concerns about the media market. Again, I think this is a huge advantage. This isn't just like adding Youngstown State, which would literally add nothing in terms of viewership to the conference. You now get UMass, who that money that they ESPN contract, which will likely be renegotiated, that contract is up in 2027. With the addition of UMass in 2025, I expect that contract, it's going to get renegotiated. When it does, football is the almighty driver and catalyst for all these conference realignments. It's hurting these other non-revenue sports. I've said this before and I will say it again. I think that these mega conferences, such as what the Big Ten and the SEC are doing, are bad. I think 16-team conferences is the absolute limit. 12-team conferences I thought were perfect. I don't think that the MAC is going to suffer on the media market. I think adding northeast section of the country, especially a big media market such as Boston, who has a rich football history, a rich basketball history, a rich hockey history, and not necessarily UMass, although UMass is pretty good. They're really good at hockey. They'll stay in the Hockey East Conference because the MAC doesn't sponsor hockey, but now they're a MAC school. Football, you get a, 10-0 Toledo or Miami traveling up there in the middle of November. People's eyes are going to be on that game. Not necessarily because of UMass, but because of the ranked undefeated team. If there's something I'm missing, please somebody tell me, but I really don't think that the media market is going to be an issue. I think that the money's going to get redistributed. It's going to get redistributed fairly, and all of the teams will benefit. It's not going to be a dip into one team's pot or the rest of the pot, and it's less revenue for everybody. No, I think that there is going to be a jump in revenue, partially because of UMass basketball, but also just by nature of there being an additional team. Across all sports, not just football, not just basketball. It's going to be across all sports. How likely is it that the MAC adds 3 more teams? Well, I've already given you my expansion partners, my perspectives, some of the perspectives you guys have suggested, thrown out. I think the MAC is going to look at 14 teams. I have no information on this other than what I've seen about potential Western Kentucky still being interested. I think the MAC is going to look at 14 teams, and that's going to be it. I don't think they're going to look to expand past that unless the right teams at the right time come along. Maybe it's grab Western Kentucky, Southern Illinois, and Missouri State. But it would have to be the right moves at the right time, and I just don't see that happening. I think the MAC is going to look for a 14th partner and look for them soon, but I don't see them adding up to 16. 14 seems to be the right number for this time. Will UMass have a different feel on their schedule this fall, knowing that they are playing 5 of their scheduled games against future conference opponents? That's an interesting question. I think UMass, when you look at everything, they're now seeing they've got 5 future conference opponents on this schedule. This is an opportunity for them to scout the conference without it affecting them. I mean, yeah, you lose all 5 of those games. You're probably not going bowling. I think they have 4 SEC teams on the schedule. I could be wrong, maybe 3. Probably not winning more than one of those SEC games. And I think 1 is optimistically generous. But you lose those MAC games, or you win 1 close, or you win 2 close. You're getting a chance to scout your future opponents. Most of those rosters will have the same guys you're going to play the year after. So you get to scout those teams, and if you're Don Brown, you scout them hard. Because now you're going to see most of those guys again the year after. This is an opportunity for you to get somewhat of an advantage on the competition in your conference before you even join the conference. UMass has been scheduling MAC teams for years, but I don't think I've seen them play 5 in a season since they were in the conference back in 2014. So that's the other part of why I think this is a natural fit. They're already playing a MAC schedule. When 5/12 of your college football schedule is from the same conference, you're basically in the conference. But going back to the question, no, I think it'll have a different feel in the sense of an opportunity to start competing with the conference before you actually join. But I don't think it'll have much more of a feel. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but I really don't think it'll be much different. I think they're going to see it as a football game, trying to be successful and go play some college football. I think the real change happens when the fall of 2025 hits, and here's why. UMass may be playing quote-unquote a MAC football schedule next year, but they're still in the Atlantic 10 for everything else. There's not going to be this disconnect. I mean, you might get this feeling of, well, we're leaving you guys, so we're going to try to win everything we can. But I don't think that there's going to be this humdrum, disappointment of their departure for them anyway. And again, I could be very wrong. But I do think that we're going to get that feel that you're asking about in the fall of 2025. Like, all right, this is real. We're in this conference. Let's go try to win this thing. So I hope that answers your question. Maybe it didn't, but I hope it does. Would it have been more beneficial to bring in Western Kentucky, Middle Tennessee, Temple, or Marshall over UMass? Yes. I think, again, going back to my earlier points on the different ratings and rankings of the conferences, I think that the MAC would have been upgraded by any of those other teams. The MAC is getting upgraded by adding UMass. Make no mistake of this, guys. This UMass addition from the Atlantic 10 is a big shock. But I think adding Western Kentucky, Middle Tennessee, Temple, Marshall, whoever you're trying to add from the group of 5, would have been a much different impact. A good one? Maybe. Who knows? A bad one? Again, who knows? Western Kentucky is the most likely candidate to join, followed by Middle Tennessee. I don't see Temple joining. I don't see Marshall joining. So I think if you're going to add 2 more, going back to my other question, it's going to be these 2. I don't know, guys. I like this move. I think it's going to benefit all parties involved. Had an opportunity to chime in on some spaces with some great folks this week during all of that. Like I said, the announcement is coming, I want to say I remember seeing on Thursday. I could be very wrong. But regardless, you guys will hear that announcement officially from UMass on whether or not they accepted before this podcast drops. So if you don't hear this podcast, that means UMass declined the invitation. And if you do hear this podcast, well, that means they accepted it. So, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Trying to make this one short and sweet this week. Just wanted to talk about UMass, my thoughts, just things I've observed just from the Twitter sphere, just from my own kind of, research. I like this move. I think it benefits both MAC and UMass in a multitude of ways. Not just focus on football, not just focus on basketball. Some of these other sports, I think they help each other out. Some of these other pipelines and windows of opportunity, I think this is the right move. Everybody talked about the MAC being too stagnant, too stable. This isn't the big, beautiful, let's go grab Ohio State or Michigan and bring them to the MAC. And I get that, and you're never going to get that. But I think this adds more stability to the Mid-American Conference, a team who has been here before, a school who has been here before with their football program. There's mutual respect. They understand what's at stake and how football drives everything. And UMass understands where they're at. They probably weren't making the playoffs, even as a G5, because they didn't have a home. Now you got a home. Now you've got a fighting chance for a playoff spot in the future college football playoffs. But who knows? It's going to be interesting to see. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please let me know. I want to continue to deliver you as much great MAC content as I possibly can. To all of my new UMass followers, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited that all of you are here. I'm looking forward to interacting with all of you and making my way up to Amherst here in the near future, maybe before you guys are even conference opponents. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for following along. Thank you for listening this week. I'm looking forward to really everything, to all the interactions, to everything you guys bring to the table. Looking forward to all of it. If you guys want to check me out on any social media platform, you can find me over at www.themscpodcast.com. I'm going to be making some tweaks, updates to the website to try to get things a little bit more streamlined. You can find me on Twitter at the MSC Podcast. You can find me on Instagram at the MSC Podcast. And over on TikTok at the MSC Podcast. Going to be trying to make some more video content for you guys. Got a couple videos up already. Have received a nice little bump of response, and I'm very appreciative for that. You can find me on YouTube at MSC Podcast. You can check me out over on YouTube. Going to be adding more videos. Got a surprise video coming here in a couple weeks. I am working on a collaboration with a current MAC championship team. You guys will not want to miss that. I will be making an announcement later this week on my Twitter exactly what that is. We've hopefully got a MAC football schedule coming out here soon for the 2024 season. I'm looking forward to getting into that, looking forward to diving into that with you guys and breaking down my potential travel schedule. So lots on the horizon. Thank you guys so much for all the love and support. I truly appreciate it. Looking forward to UMass joining the MAC. Looking forward to all the great interactions and talking with all of you guys. But guys, thank you so much once again for tuning in, and we will see you next week.